Hi, our names are Kate Ballmelli and Megan Curran, and today we're going to be presenting on the biomechanical components of hurdling. So we have a little intro video to show today to show what not to do, what we won't be looking at, but it's just kind of a fun little start. So we're going to be watching this guy in the far left coming in strong. This is in the Olympics. Out, and he beats it. So that is what not to do in hurdling, but we're going to be studying the movement of these other guys and what they're doing today. So we will get started with the history.
So the first thing we'll be looking at today is the history of hurdles. Most people know what hurdling is from track. It's probably one of the most popular track events there is for both men and women. I know personally I had a lot of friends that did hurdling, and it was very interesting watching them do a hurdle race because they have a very particular movement when jumping over the hurdles. So men's and women's hurdles can vary from a length of 55 to 400 meters, and it really depends on two things: the location and the skill of the hurdler. For a location, it depends if you are inside or outside, depending on the length, and then the skill level also is based off of a more skilled hurdler can do a longer distance. Also, as the distance between the hurdles increases, the height of the hurdle decreases. And to look more at the actual background and the start of hurdling, it was thought to have started in England in the early 19th century, but people were really unsure of the exact history of hurdling and where exactly it came from. However, the first appearance hurdling made was the men's 110 meters in the Olympic Games in Athens in 1896, which is a little before the 19th century. Finally, the movement of hurdles has changed significantly over the years. When you look back at when hurdles first began, when they jumped over the hurdles, they landed on 2 feet, which is very different from today.
So I'm going to be talking about the mechanics of movement of today. The first thing we're going to break down is the sprint hurdles. So this is a track and field sprint event. It ranges from 55 meters to 110 meters. When looking at the goals of the movement, we want to see the athlete achieve maximum velocity during the race. They want to minimize deceleration and flight time over the hurdles during the clearance phase. And then they want a strong start with a quick acceleration and a strong finish. So the jump, aka the hurdle, is just considered a modification of running mechanics, which is why this is a sprint event, basically. So in this breakdown of the event, we see a 7 or 8 step approach coming into the first hurdle. Then we see the lead leg will initiate the second to last step. We'll see a shorter step, which is the cut step, takeoff, landing, and the sprinting will resume once the trail leg hits the ground. So you'll repeat this until the final hurdle, and you will accelerate into the finish line. So with elite athletes, specifically for sprinting, we see about 3 steps between each hurdle. The displacement from the second to last or penultimate step will create a powerful elastic response for takeoff, which will activate the hip flexors of the lead leg and place the athlete at a low trajectory over the hurdle, which we can see in these images right here. And then when we're looking at male and female differences, we see the takeoff foot will leave the ground about 1.8 to 2 meters away from the hurdle for females and 2.1 to 2.2 meters away for males. So you can kind of see that in this first image here. It's about 2 meters away from that hurdle. So when we're comparing it with the long hurdles, it's going to be the same mechanics of movement. This is just considered a long distance event. So this one will range from 200 to 400 meters, and we'll have the similar physiology capacity of 400 meter to 800 meter runners in track and field. So like I said, it's the same goals and movement mechanics as the sprint. The only differences is that this one is going to be a little less aggressive due to long distance economy adjustments that the runners have to take into account. We will also see this incorporating steering because you're moving around a track, and a lot of the elite athletes will be alternating lead legs between hurdles. So the males will take about 19 to 23 steps to their first hurdle, and then they will take 12 to 15 steps between each one, whereas the females will do about 22 to 25 steps to their first hurdle and usually about 14 to 19 in between.
So the first biomechanical concept we will be looking at for hurdling is the phases of movement. We did talk about earlier how hurdling has a very specific way and shape of movement. So we start off with the impulse phase, which is first the hands leave the ground, initiating the arm movement. The legs press against the shoes, your torso straightens and lifts, and you have a strong push off your back leg. This impulse is the hip, knee, and ankle joints of the supporting leg are extending during this takeoff. The next phase would be your acceleration phase. It's when the athlete rests their forefoot on the metatarsus, completing the first step. However, your calf does remain parallel to the ground. It's also said that the number of steps taken depends on the length of the hurdles, how long the race is, and if you're male or female. So that is all very dependent on different factors. The stride is also consisted of the two phases, which is support and flight. Next, we have the steps between the fences, or as they call them, hurdles. Rhythm and length are very important to muscular coordination and the way we jump. So then when we finally get to the fall phase, the fall leg is fully extended and rigid and falls on the metatarsal. And the fast and active forward traction is applied to stop you from going face first into the ground. The main difference between men and women in their phases of movement is men typically are taller than women, so they would have a longer stride length, and which is also mentioned earlier that they don't have to jump as early or jump later than the females. And then their overall air time is more than women also because their center of mass peak is when they are directly above the hurdle.
Okay, and then when we're looking at momentum of clearance, more specifically in sprint hurdling, you can see it broken down into the X, Y, and Z components. So for the X component, it's noted that the angular momentum is negative during the clearance phase, meaning it's a clockwise rotation. This is from a right side view. So we see that this momentum is in the trail leg during the early phase of clearance, and it shifts to the lead leg during the downward phase. So that's that transfer of momentum there. In the Y component, we also see that the angular momentum is negative, and this is from a rear view of right foot takeoff, so it's clockwise. This transfer of momentum is essential for trail leg abduction. So to slow the abduction, the leg will lower and the opposing elbow will elevate. So the right leg lowers, which is the right foot takeoff, so the lead leg. In the Z component, we see that the angular momentum is positive, so counterclockwise from a bird's eye view, where we see the opposing arm will move backward in an attempt to counteract the trail leg forward movement. So this for momentum, it's more really about the transfer of angular momentum and movement. So it's the same movement for male and female typically, so it's not a huge notable difference in the momentum.
So the third concept of biomechanical concept of hurdling is how the ground reaction forces of sprint hurdling specifically. The first thing is that the force exerted by the ground, or the ground reaction force, plays a really big part in the takeoff and landing of hurdling, but not so much in when you're actually mid-jump. The ground reaction force during takeoff causes an increase in vertical velocity, while there's a decrease in forward horizontal velocity. However, the forward velocity is recovered in the second support phase, or also known as the end of the fall phase after the hurdle. When it comes to your center of mass, the downward motion of the center of mass is stopped at the end of the fall phase also, which is the landing, which would make sense because that is when you finally hit the ground and don't go down any farther. ground reaction forces also determine the eccentric and concentric phases of contact, which is very important. Looking at differences between man and female, there's like a big actually difference in ground reaction forces. The peak center of mass in men is directly over the hurdle, where ground reaction forces don't really play a big part, whereas the peak center of mass in women is 0.3 meters before the hurdle, where the ground reaction forces are actually playing a big part in the takeoff. So it really, looking into that ground reaction forces plays more of a part in women hurdling than men.
And that concludes our presentation for today. Thank you for watching. Sweet.
This
okay.
is GFR. Fuck me.
Oh, I forgot to wait. Also here are the references. I'll just include that in there. So yeah, thank you for watching. Have a great day.